Hi guys, and welcome to How to Plot Like a Pro. If this is your first time watching Writing Compelling Fiction, know that we do a lot of stuff like this that's really all about educating you as a writer and helping you become the best possible writer you can be. Let's get right to work. A plot is a framework. Everything that you have in a story is built on the same frame, regardless of what genre you're writing. So like a house, there's a floor or a foundation, walls, and a roof. And it's the same thing with your plot. They all have similar common elements to them. And those common elements are the plot that build the framework for the story. The way that it's decorated, essentially, just like a house, is the genre. So you can see like you have romance and mystery and suspense and all of those. They can take that exact same framework of a foundation, of walls, and a roof, and then make it their own into their own genre. So that's essentially why I'm doing this, How to Plot Like a Pro, because everything that I'm going to teach you today is the same for virtually all books. Now, are there outliers that don't do this? Yes, but they are outliers, and people that want to write outliers, I think that's commendable, but it's really hard among the 19 million books on Amazon to have your book noticed and have your book become the one that everybody talks about already. And then if you're an outlier, if people can't define it or talk about it, it makes it extra hard. Yes, you can break the rules, but definitely know what the rules are before you decide that you're going to break them. A plot should be like a roller coaster. It should make you feel that constant feeling of tension in your gut. I hate roller coasters, absolutely despise anything that goes up high like that, like water slides and roller coasters. But when I was a kid, I would go on the Nantucket beach roller coaster, which was a wooden coaster, and it would click, click, click all the way up. It was terrifying and it was really shaky. And that feeling of tension in your gut as you're going up in the coaster and you're reaching the hill is the feeling that you want the reader to have in your book. I'm currently reading 0 Days by Ruth Ware, and I'm only like 3 or 4 chapters in, and I already have that tension going, and I can't wait to get back to the book. The pace doesn't lag either, because you've got to think about a plot a lot like a car on a journey, because the destination is for the character to achieve their goal. And we're going to get into what goals are and everything in a minute. But that's the destination for the character. And when you start having long passages of thinking or long passages of history, what happens is that the car kind of just stalls on the side of the road, or worse, it turns around and goes backwards. And if you've ever tried to drive from Indiana to Massachusetts with 2 small children in the car, and I have done it multiple times when I used to live up there, you know that the longer you stay dead on the side of the road, the more frustrated everybody's going to become. It's boring, essentially, and that's what long passages of narrative and backstory do. Not to say you can't have those, but you need to be really aware of where you're putting them in. And then just when you think things are cool with your book, just when you think everybody's going to be happy, reaching what looks like an ending, it's like a false ending, and then everything drops out and goes back. Just when the reader thinks everything's great, boom, some other thing comes out of left field. And then when you get to the end of the book or a ride, you feel emotionally wrung out, and you're like hugging the book because you're so happy to have read it and gotten to know these people. A plot is not, and here's why the animations are being a pain in the neck, because they're not working there. But a plot is not things happening to your character. So let me explain what that is. That's passiveness. And we all have this friend like this, right? Where everything in the world happens to him or her. Like they're always a victim, and their car breaks down because Ford designed a bad car, and they lose their job because their boss was a bad boss. They get stuck in the grocery store line because the people in front of them were terrible. That's all things being done to them, rather than them going, okay, maybe my car broke down because I drove at 110 miles an hour and it wasn't meant to do that. Or I forgot to get the oil changed. And maybe I lost my job because I told my boss off. Like, that's a plot where you're taking actions, where everything is being done to the character. That's sort of a Perils of Pauline thing that readers really don't like. At a certain point, they want the character to take action. That's not to say that you can't have a bunch of things dump on the character in the very beginning of the book. Like the 0 Days that I'm reading by Ruth Ware, her husband is killed very early on in the book, and she's a suspect for the murder. So that is something that has been done to her. But everything that she does to solve that murder is her taking actions, not people coming to her with like, oh, here's a clue, oh, here's some help for you. It's all about her taking action. Because when characters have a lot of things being done to them, what they're doing is a lot of thinking and reacting. And if you've ever sat there and watched somebody think, it's super boring, right? It's like watching paint dry, or worse. So you don't want your character spending a lot of time thinking on the page. You don't want them to spend a lot of time being the victim. I also think that plots are a lot like dating apps. And although I'm remarried now to my second husband, I was on dating apps for quite a while. And anybody who's been on them knows that there's a lot of things that make you swipe right as opposed to swiping left. And for me, it was when I was intrigued and wanted to know more based on the text and the photos, or I felt a commonality with the person in terms of histories, beliefs, shared experiences. I liked the hooks that were in their profile, or I felt an emotional connection in that instant from something. Maybe it was a picture or some words they wrote or something like that. That's what makes people swipe right. So it's intrigue, it is curiosity, it is emotion. And that's what a plot is like. A really good plot should do the same thing. It should make people swipe right and buy your book. Once they buy the book, what keeps them reading to the end? And it's sort of the same thing about why people keep dating or break up. Not entirely, but similar. When people first start dating somebody they met, a stranger they met on a dating app, they continue to stay with them because they're more intrigued as time goes on. So things get more and more interesting and they want to learn more about this person because people don't, well, I take that back. I've been on some dates where people dump their entire history in the first hour. And I have been guilty of that myself. And that just makes the other person run for the hills. When that happens, people tune out and they stop listening. So if you instead lay little pebbles along the way, the reader gets interested or the dater gets interested. They find more common threads. The relationship between them that is built on emotion gets tested by the character making choices that maybe the reader doesn't agree with. And that emotional thread builds. Or people will put down your book and stop dating you if the emotional thread is broken and the common threads are minimal. If they're not seeing that commonality, that relationship, then they're going to stop reading. And so what we're looking for when we create a book is something that echoes common threads that we can all relate to. It doesn't have to be that everybody in the world understands what it's like to be, I don't know, stranded at the bottom of the ocean in a submarine, right? 99% of us have no idea what that feels like. But we do understand that fear of captivity, that fear of death, that fear of claustrophobia, all of those kinds of things. That's what I mean by the common threads. No matter what plot you're writing, no matter what century it takes place in or what world or planet it takes place on, you want to always come back to those common threads that we can all relate to. And we'll get to some more about that in a minute. That comes from having compelling characters. And there's Shrek and Jax from Sons of Anarchy, who was amazing. Braveheart, Frankenstein, Sawyer from Lost. These were all compelling characters because they were just a little bit above ordinary. They were just a little bit different than the ordinary. They loved their families deeply. Agree or disagree with everything that Tony Soprano did or Jax did in Sons of Anarchy, but ultimately you knew they loved their families deeply. And that's that kind of common thread that I'm talking about that can make somebody like Tony Soprano or Jax more relatable to other people. They get it because they also love their families deeply. So that thing can help the reader or the viewer in these cases overcome a lot of moral repugnancy, if for nothing else of a better word, that normally they would be feeling, right? Because this person's doing horrible things, like Tony Soprano breaks somebody's kneecaps in the first episode. But because you see him being vulnerable and you see that common thread of a man who's struggling to do the right thing by his family and his job and his company, whatever you want to call the mafia, the viewer relates to him and keeps going with the journey despite those. They are relatable, they're strong, they're sympathetic, they're wounded, but they are impacted by the past. And we're going to get to how that works in a second. So the framework of your plot has three things. It has a goal. So the character needs to have a goal that they're going to achieve. We're going to get into exactly how to create that in a second. They have to have a motivation for it. This guy's goal on this page is to build a house. And his motivation is because he's freezing and it's winter time and he wants to be in a house. But there's multiple conflicts, which are all the things that are getting in the way of him building the house. Broken tools, building inspectors, all of that kind of things are getting in the way of him building the house. So that's the basic framework of the plot. And like I said, it works a lot like building a house. And there's one more thing that we need to talk about. And that is the catalyst that forces the change. So the character's going along in their life happy-dappy, and then a catalyst comes along that forces them to change. Most of us, frankly, don't just decide one day, I'm going to change. I'm going to become a better person. I'm going to overcome this, or I'm going to deal with this trauma. 99% of us do not wake up and go, you know what? Today's a really good day to get over my fear of heights. Because it just doesn't happen. We settle into our comfort zones and the things that feel safe to us, and we stay there. Characters are no different because they're people, even though they're on the page and they're fictional. They need something that forces them out of their comfort zone. If you are terrified of heights, but your child gets stuck on the top of the Empire State Building, you can bet your butt that you're going to climb, or maybe not climb the stairs because 100 and something flights, but you're going to take that elevator up to the top of the Empire State Building and you're going to go rescue him. Despite your fear of heights, you are going to step out of your comfort zone in order to achieve that goal of rescuing your child. This catalyst, this trouble, is what starts sending the plot in new directions. Like in 0 Days that I'm reading right now, her husband being murdered sends her life in a new trajectory. And it's why you're writing about this exact moment in time in your character's life. Now, no matter what you're writing, whether it's a memoir or a novel, there's always this exact moment in the character's life that is the moment of change. Now, you may have some history that comes into it. In All the Light We Cannot See, there's a lot of storyline with the young girl, young Maria, with her dad. But by and large, the main storyline is those few days that she is in France during the German occupation in World War II. It's only a few days that she's struggling to figure out what's going on and save herself. So that exact moment in time is the pivotal moment in time where Maria has to learn to fend for herself despite being blind, because everybody that she's ever relied on is gone and it's just her here in that house in France. So that exact moment in time tests her out of her comfort zone. For Werner, in All the Light We Cannot See, this exact moment in time forces him to finally confront the thing that he's kind of ignored all along, and that is his being forced to join the Nazi army and all of the terrible things that he has been forced to do. Like all along, he's been kind of going along with it because he didn't really see a way out. But the minute he gets close to Maria and is ordered to kill her, that's when he's like, you know what, I have to change this situation. I have to step outside my comfort zone and do something different. So that's kind of what I mean by that. You want to start by knowing what your character is giving up, because they have a life already when the book starts. I mean, start a book with a baby being born and then carry them all the way through, because that would frankly be boring. Most of us don't want to spend years watching this kid grow up before it gets interesting. You want to know what they're giving up in their ordinary world. So you should think for a minute about what your character's ordinary world looks like. What is their day-to-day existence before this book happens, before this trouble comes into their life? You know, they clocking in and clocking out of a job that they hate. Are they having coffee every Tuesday with their best friend? Are they going to their mother's house for Sunday dinner? What does their day-to-day life look like? A mother that has to rescue the child from the top of the Empire State Building, maybe her day-to-day life is like PTA mom and working really hard at a job to buy a new car or to take the family on vacation. And if she climbs all the way to the top, she could have a panic attack and a heart attack, die, and have to give all of that up. I want you guys to take a minute to write down what your character's ordinary world looks like. So what did you guys learn from writing your character's ordinary life? What did you learn about them from that? So how does that relate to the catalyst? You want to make sure that your catalyst is big enough to force them to change their life, and something that will make them take action as the plot progresses. But the catalyst for the plot needs to be big enough for the character to act. So in a romance novel, the catalyst is never, ever, 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 ever the romance. The romance is a complication to the plot, and I think that's something I touch on in a later slide. A romance has multiple plot lines going. It's got the romance plot line, it's got the main characters' plots, and all of that. And meeting each other and falling in love only complicates all of that. So let's say the woman wants to save the family farm, but she meets a guy who's in direct opposition to her goal, and he's trying to take it over and turn it into condominiums. Well, then falling in love with him would just be a complication. That's how it works in You've Got Mail. So in You've Got Mail, Tom Hanks' character wants to build that ginormous bookstore and, you know, make another success just like he did before, where Meg Ryan's character wants to just let her bookstore succeed despite the big bookstore moving in. Them falling in love with each other only complicates all of the issues that they already have going on in their external plot. So the catalyst of You've Got Mail is Tom Hanks coming to town to build Fox Books. And Lucienne said that writing about the ordinary world helped her come up with everyday details about the world. Yes, because even if you're building a world in another planet or another time period or another country, you really want to be able to have those same kinds of details, because human beings seek comfort in predictability. They seek comfort in having things that are the same no matter what, that they can depend upon. And even if it's just like jetting around Mars every Friday morning, that character is going to have that kind of schedule and dependability, because that's what characters like. As much as you can possibly understand about their ordinary world, you will understand how this catalyst impacts them. So when this big change comes out of nowhere, what does that do to their ordinary world? It should shake it up a little. What event is the catalyst for change in your book? What trouble kicks off your story? So there's two types of goals, motivations, and conflicts. And if you guys downloaded the plot handout and filled that out, then you've already kind of figured all of that out a little bit. But I wanted to kind of talk about how to put it all together. On the channel, we had a whole series of videos about plot, both the external plot and internal plot. So the external plot is all of the physical, tangible things in the book. It is the actions the character has to take, the things that they do, the things that they need, like a job or a family farm or a child. All of those things are physical and tangible. You can touch them, right? You can see them, you can quantify them. Internal plot is the most vital plot, because it's the one that connects the readers. That's the one that's emotional. It's the emotion that binds the reader to the story. It's what they can relate to. It's how they see themselves in the character. If they can't see themselves in the character, they don't feel like they can relate. When you have the internal plot and you have all that emotion, they should be able to see themselves in that character in some way. Remember how we talked about those common threads? You really want to have something in that, in the internal plot. We're going to talk about how to develop one. I want you to think about for a second, what is my character's book length goal? You should be able to name that. And we're talking the external goal, not the internal goal. To catch the bad guy, it's a pretty simple goal, but it does have a lot of steps. And how does the trouble impact this goal? How does the catalyst change it? So the thing that, boom, sets off your book and starts the trouble in your book, how does that change your character's goal or impact it? That's the thing that I think that people aren't necessarily thinking of. So the character have a goal in the ordinary world, like maybe your character wants to get a promotion. This is what she's working towards all the time, is getting her promotion. Like in Bad Moms, the original one, this is all she wants, is to get a promotion. But then all of a sudden her life starts falling apart. She finds out that her husband is cheating. She's got the PTA moms on top of her. She's got to do stuff for a bake sale. Everything falls apart in that one day where she gets all the stuff all over her, the food all over herself and everything. That catalyst forces her to act out, because she's just like fed up with perfect mom kind of life. And so she becomes a bad mom. It's a really cool little story how like this is where ordinary world is going, because you can see that in the movie, and then boom, everything falls apart in one time. And that is the trouble that forces the character to act. Those actions that they have to do A, B, C, become scenes. So you want to make sure that the goal is enough for that. It can't be as easy as just having one idea and boom, execute it and boom, you're done. There's got to be a lot more steps involved in it, because it needs to be able to carry an entire book. And that means the character has to do a bunch of things, and their journey to achieve this goal should not be easy, because nobody likes those people, right? That just breeze in and everything works out for them and they're good, right? Like they don't have any setbacks or anything. We like to see characters overcome setbacks. That's what you kind of want to look for, is what are the actions that they're going to have to take to achieve this goal? And there must be several of them, and they must have lots of opportunities for things to go wrong, because that's what we're going to talk about next. The external plot, the second thing that you have is the motivation. This is the why, or the because, why they are doing this. And when we're talking external, we're talking an external motivation, a physical, tangible motivation. So for Shrek, fairy tale creatures get dumped in his swamp. His external motivation to get his privacy back. So you really want to kind of look at what is the character doing and why are they doing it from an external standpoint. Liam Neeson in Taken, his goal obviously is to find his daughter because she's been taken. And his motivation is because she's been taken by very bad men. Her life is clearly in danger. And these are men who want to use her for very bad purposes. So those are all physical, tangible motivations for him to do this. Internal is another story, and we'll get to that in a minute. So you want to think about what your character's external motivations are. What do they want and why do they want it? And guess what? There's an ask yourself coming up with here, right here. So I want you to think about 3 external motivations that they could have and list those out. And I want them to be physical, tangible, like there's somebody in danger or the bank account is empty. There has to be physical, tangible reasons, not emotional. Okay, how'd that go? What if the motivation changes and they shouldn't get it? Okay, that's a great question. I'll come back to that in a second. You definitely should know what their motivation is at the beginning of the book. To solve the murder because she's being accused. That's 0 days right now. She's got to figure it out because she's the one being accused. Now, I just read a book called Something in the Water, I think. And it's a woman who has one motivation in the beginning, and that is to get this millions of dollars hidden away in a bank account because she wants to secure her future. And her and her husband are working together to do this. But then, and don't read the book because I'm going to give it away, the twist away, but about 2/3 of the way through the book, she realizes that her husband has set her up and that everything that she thought was true was a lie. So her motivation changes. It becomes to get to the truth and cover up his death and a lot of other things. And so, yes, the motivation can absolutely change. And you should know it both at the beginning of the book and when you have that twist in the plot where it changes everything. Because that's what plot twists and plot turns do. They sort of shift everything for the character, that what they thought they wanted isn't what they want anymore, and they go back. Same thing with Shrek. His original motivation is to just get his swamp back. He gets his swamp back, and then he realizes that it stinks to be there alone now because he's made friends and he really misses them and he doesn't like being alone. So his motivation to go back to the castle and get Fiona is about being with her because he's fallen in love with her, and then also making friends with Gingy and Pinocchio and everybody else. So his motivation changes. It's no longer about getting the swamp back to be alone. It's to be able to get that life that he suddenly craves. So yes, their motivations can absolutely change, and that makes it interesting. So the external conflict is the but. It's all of the things that get in the way. It's the bad guys. It's the distance. It's the money. It's all of the external, physical, tangible things that get in the character's way. So maybe there's a police officer that's hiding evidence, or maybe there's a character who's lying. All of those are physical, tangible things. So you want to think about what those might be, what conflicts they're going to keep there. They're going to keep the character from getting what they want. And you need a lot of these because if, like I said before, if it's easy for them to overcome what they're doing, then the reader loses interest. They're like, okay, so she's already saved the family farm and it's only chapter 2. Like they have no other reason to keep reading. Malcolm asks, can characters have similar motivations but different views on their goals? Yes, there's a lot of books that are like that where you have two characters in opposition to each other, like a murder mystery, let's say, and the cop wants to solve it to get justice for the person that died, and the other person wants to solve it because they want to free themselves from being a suspect. Sometimes it can be all about providing security and safety. Like, let's say if we have the two landowners, we have the one that wants to save the family farm so she can have security and safety, and the guy that wants to buy that foreclosed farm so that he can build the townhomes and have security and safety for his financial future. That's an example where you can have different goals and similar motivations. I have another ask yourself again coming up. I want you to think about your character's conflicts, external, physical, tangible conflicts, things that really, truly get in their way. I want you to come up with 6 of those. So let's think about those for a minute. But did you struggle to come up with 6? Did you struggle to come up with enough conflicts that are in their way? Because if you are, then you may need to rethink the goal and make it bigger or harder to achieve for some reason. Put a lot more roadblocks in their way because you really want to have it be unique and strong enough to carry a whole book. The plot in Vikings with Ragnar and his brother is kind of that same thing. And his brother sort of turns bad in a way because he wants more than what Ragnar wants. Ragnar just wants to be like the number 1 Viking, and so he can protect his family, and he reluctantly becomes the king of the Vikings. But once he is, he wants to stay there because that's his way to protect his family, expand his empire, and everything else. But he's doing it in a way that sort of fulfills the destiny that he thinks he has for him and his people, whereas his brother in Vikings really just wants to like have the hot men, the money, and all of that. So yes, you can absolutely make that work. So CC said, how can a writer utilize tropes in their plot without it becoming cliche? So you want to twist it. And we're going to talk a little bit about twists in here, not a whole lot, but I want you to think about how can I do this differently? Because the tropes that you're talking about are common tropes across actually all books, like a fish out of water or a person that's, a city mouse in a country setting or whatever. Those kinds of tropes apply to a lot of different genres. You can have like a chef crime solver, and that's a fish out of water kind of thing because she's doing something that she's not normally familiar with. But how you do it differently is you come up with a twist on it. So I have this thing, and I'm not sure if I covered it in this video, but you want to think of 6 ideas for how that can be different. So if you have friends to lovers, let's say, and you want to take a romance and come up with something a little bit different, you want to come up with 6 twists on that variation. So go through what you have for an idea and come up with 6 different ideas for it, because that makes you really think outside the box. Cheryl says she has very little external. Then that's part of the problem with the action in the book that you're having. So if you don't have a lot of external conflicts and you don't have a lot of things standing in their way that are going on, that's why I talked to you about possibly having another crime thing running through your book, because otherwise, what's the character going to do all day? If they don't have any conflicts and they're just like, oh, there's the bad guy, I'm going to arrest him, then there's nothing for them to do, and characters need to act. So you need to add some kind of other plot that's going on. You can eventually tie those 2 things together down the way. You really want to kind of keep thinking, keep asking questions like, what else can I do here? How can I make this bigger? How can I tie these 2 things together? Let's move on to creating the GMC statement. So your GMC statement is the character wants what because of the motivation, but conflict. What do they want? That's their goal. Why do they want it? That's their motivation. And what's standing in their way? That is their conflict. Take a second to kind of write that down. My character wants what, why, and then some buts. And you can have a list of buts if you want afterwards. So go back through your notes of what you just wrote down and come up with this exact sentence with each of your main characters. Okay, how'd we do? Did everybody write their sentence down? My character wants what, because why, and but conflicts. And you should have all of those notes in there. And it really, truly helps you with back cover copy, a pitch, a query letter, a synopsis, all of those things. And for me, when I first started out writing novels and I would kind of lose my way and add things that didn't need to be in there, I would write that goal, motivation, and conflict statement on a piece of paper at the top of my monitor so that I never forgot where I'm supposed to be going with this plot. Because sometimes you're like, oh, I want to add a funny scene in here. But no, you don't just need a funny scene. You need a funny scene that feeds into the plot. So everything must feed into the plot. Key to believability. The key to making readers believe it is, why will your character force themselves to battle or overcome these obstacles? Because a lot of times I read books or read manuscripts or whatever where I don't see any reason why the character would do this. They don't have a motivation. And what we're going to get to next is the internal, the emotional. And that's where that believability comes in. Because if your reader's looking at it going, this makes no sense for this character to do this, then they're not going to believe it. They're not going to relate to it, and they're going to put it down and move on to another book. So every character needs to have a why. Everything they do actually needs to have a why. And you as the author need to have a why. Why are you writing this book? Why are you tackling this theme? Why are you covering this story? What is burning inside of you that you want to get out? I have the same theme in every one of my books, and I figured it out around book 7. And it's sort of the love song of T. Alfred Prufrock from T.S. Eliot. It's all about how if we are true to ourselves, we can finally find happiness. So that is at the base of every single story that I write. So let's go back to external versus internal a little bit. Remember, the internal is the emotional plot. So this is super important. And a lot of authors kind of don't do the work here because they need to. This is what is driving them to make these decisions, the character. 99% of the time, the character is completely unaware of what they want emotionally, because in real life, most of us don't sit around thinking about what we want emotionally. We just go through the motions or go after what we need. So with Liam Neeson in Taken, he's not taking any time to just sit there and think, my relationship with my daughter has been really troubled because I worked so much when she was young, and maybe I can get back together with her by rescuing her. A, he doesn't have time to do that because there are guys about to auction her off. And B, he's Guy. Guys don't tend to sit around and think, if only my relationship with my daughter was healed. People just don't tend to do that, particularly male characters. Most of us, though, don't really think about the deep, deep, deep down stuff unless we go to therapy. So Shrek wants to be loved for who he is. Edward in Pretty Woman wants to be loved for who he is, but he never sits there and thinks about it. He just does all these things to kind of keep himself from thinking about it. This internal goal, motivation, and conflict, this emotional connection that you're going to build with your reader, comes from the wounds of the past for the character, because they have things go on inside. But to create compelling characters and a compelling internal plot, you always want to ask these two questions, and you'll see me talk about them a lot in videos. Why and what was the impact? These form the basis of the deep emotional wounds. The impact is what creates characters. Impact is what molds their personality. Impact is what will form the basis of everything. If we go back to that slide with Jax and Sawyer, and I don't think Tony Soprano's on there, but Frankenstein and Shrek, those characters were all impacted by their past. So their pasts, the traumas, the deep emotional wounds are what make them compelling, make people love them. And I find that a lot of writers are too nice to their characters. Even if you're writing a romantic comedy, but you still want to have some kind of trauma in their background that makes them who they are, makes them afraid to take risks or afraid to be public about their wishes. Whatever that happens to be, there has to be a moment in their past that contributes to that. A lot of this is things that I have learned over the course of publishing 85 books. The most recent book, I had 3 sisters in that book where they were all impacted by the death of their mother as children. And they were all impacted differently because they're all different ages. One was the oldest, middle, and the youngest, and each was impacted differently and had different reactions. But that one incident made a big difference for each of them in different ways. So I want you to go back to your catalyst in your book, and I want you to think about this. The catalyst makes the character begin to act, and is also the catalyst for the internal growth and change. The trouble that sets off the internal plot is often the same as the external plot. So if you think of a lot of movies and books that you read, a lot of times what happens when the catalyst happens is the character has to step outside their comfort zone, both physically and emotionally. You've got to kind of figure out, what is my character going to confront? What are they going to deal with? How are they going to get through this? I want you to ask yourself what your character is most afraid of. What is their worst nightmare? So if you think back to your character's childhood, what happened to them? Were they abandoned? Did they have to be a caretaker for everybody? All of us have these wounds in our childhood. Yes, you can keep the story on the lighter side without going too dark by having comedic characters on the side or a comedic situation, because that's what I would do a lot of times when I had a really deep, dark character, like my very first book, which has now been re-released as Kissing Mr. Wrong. My hero was a recovering alcoholic, which is a pretty deep, dark issue. But my heroine was more lighthearted and did funny things like dress up in a banana suit to sell fruit baskets on the side of the road because she was desperate for business. So that's how you can kind of do this, have something funny within it. Douglas's worst nightmare is failing to protect the village. At the beginning of the book, Sam and Douglas's home is attacked. So it's not just protecting the village, Malcolm. There's a little bit more to it than that. So failing to protect the village hurts a lot of people. So it's more about failing the people that rely on him. Because if you can go a little bit deeper, failing to protect the village is more of an external sort of thing. If you can go a little bit deeper, and his worst nightmare is to let down the people who love and care about him and rely on him, then you get at a more emotional kind of connection there. Jason's worst nightmare would be falling in love again. So no, my answer is to that. So if you're writing a romance, Jane, the romance is never, ever, ever the plot. His fear of falling in love is not about falling in love. His fear is trusting somebody that is going to let him down. As if his first worry is if his first wife did things that were mistrustful, he would have trouble trusting everybody, not just another woman. So you really want to kind of dig deeper than just falling in love again, because the problem wasn't that he fell in love. It was who he fell in love with and what that person did to him. It could have been his best friend or his uncle, could have been any of those people, but his fear is going to be trusting someone and having them turn out to not be who he thought they were. So I think it might be bigger than that, Gayla. Maybe she doesn't want to let down her grandmother who matters so much to her. Maybe there's something in her past where she did. Maybe there's a moment that she really deeply regrets with her grandmother that will come up later, a little secret, or maybe a traumatic moment that will come back. With Wendy's worst nightmare is to be stuck in the clutches of her ex. The worst nightmare is an emotional thing. So her worst nightmare would be to be under someone else's control. So she is going to really, really want to be in control of her own life. So that's what it is. It's not about the ex. It's not about the person. It is about the emotional issue that is tied to that event. So being caught in a domestic violence situation, that emotional event underneath that all is being controlled by another person. And so that would be the fear that she would really have. It's really about having somebody else let you down or lie to you or something like that. All right, so let's talk about internal plots. You absolutely, positively must have an internal plot because it's what builds the connection with the reader. And people can argue that, male-dominated books don't have that. But Hunt for Red October, which was Tom Clancy's book that was a huge hit and is a male-written book, definitely has an emotional connection that the Russian sub-commander wants peace and a place where he can be himself and all of that. And everybody can relate to that. So in Die Hard, he wants to kind of make up for the mistakes that he has made. It's not just about rescuing his wife. It's also about making up for all the ways he's screwed up his life and other people's lives. So there is still an internal plot there. And that is why I think Die Hard has become a movie that people watch every single year, men and women. And Hunt for Red October is a classic movie because there's still that emotional plot there. And that emotional plot is what creates connection. It has to be relatable, impactful, and believable. So what their internal goal is the thing they want most emotionally. So the worst nightmare is the thing they're going to avoid, but the internal goal is what they want most to achieve emotionally. They're going to avoid ever letting down people again. They will probably want to internally feel like they can count on other people, to let themselves go enough to count on other people. It's kind of a diametric opposite, which I really like when you have things that people are avoiding, but yet they also want at the same time. Maybe they really want to have somebody they can trust. Like Shrek. Shrek wants to avoid all people. His whole worst nightmare is to have people around him, well, fairy tale creatures, because people hurt him. But what does Shrek really, really want emotionally down inside? He wants to be loved for who he is. And you can't be loved for who you are all by yourself. You have to have other people in your life to do that. So that opposition creates conflict, continual, constant conflict. You go back to what your character's worst nightmare is and you start putting it with what they want most emotionally, you're going to find some great conflicts in there. Healing, revenge, security, safety, acceptance, all of those themes are common themes that everybody can relate to. And I said this in the beginning, that we all want that commonality because that's what we will relate to when we're reading the book. What is their deep emotional wound and their internal goal? Jordan wants to feel worthy and valuable again. He wants redemption for what happened to his deputy. He wants someone to love him. Maybe he wants someone to see his value, because if he's wanting to be worthy and valuable again, maybe he wants somebody to make him feel valuable. And he's going to have to realize that other people can never make you feel that way. You have to do that yourself. Lainey wants to be able to believe and trust in herself. In order to have that, Gala, as a internal goal, then she has to have screwed up a lot of things in her life. And maybe she trusts other people too much, or maybe she just doesn't act fast enough. Whatever causes her to have screwed up these other things, you definitely need to have that. In a romance, the romance is never, ever, ever the plot. Let's not make that the plot. Character has to want to be whole on their own before they find love. And love comes along after they have grown into whole people, because nobody wants that one friend that's like still looking for worth and her self-acceptance and everything in another man, because we all know how that's going to work out. It's not going to work out good. Gayla's character, Lainey, needs to have found her own self-worth and trust in herself before she falls in love. Okay, so the internal motivation. Why do you need to know this? And this is why this particular thing is bolded, because I think a lot of people forget this part. People don't change without a reason to change. None of us, like I said at the beginning of this video, none of us willingly go into changing ourselves. 99.9% of us wait until something forces us to change. That's why alcoholics and drug addicts have a rock bottom. That is what forces them to change, because they lose everything and they don't have a choice. Otherwise, we would stick in our comfort zones. We all know that, right? Like, we like to do the same things every day. We like to kind of stay where we are. To get somebody off the couch and out running, for instance, maybe they have to have a heart attack, or maybe they're inspired by something that they see. There's a catalyst. There is something that forces them to change. I remember there was a female runner that was murdered on her run, and we were talking about it on a group, and there was a guy in the group who was overweight, and he read about all of these people that were so dedicated to running for this girl, and he was not a runner, and he said, I'm going to run to the end of the block, and he did. He started running that day. It's terrible for him and everything else, but he kept up with it, and it was really cool. I followed him on Facebook for a long time. Then he stopped running, so maybe he wasn't all that inspired, but it was really cool to see. And if you put that into your book, and you've got a character that has been inspired to change or forced to change for a reason, that really works. The motivation is the key to believability. You can make anything work if it's properly motivated. If you guys have seen the movie The Box or the movie Sophie's Choice or the movie Seven, those are all horrific situations that are motivated strongly enough for the character to make those choices. And I'm not going to get into them because they're awful and dark movies. But you can make anything work if the motivation is strong enough and rooted in those deep emotional wounds that they have. Maybe she's really figuring out that if she doesn't get her act together and figure out how to believe in herself and be strong, she's going to keep screwing things up. And now with Gayla's character, she's got 2 little kids to worry about. So really think about what the emotional drives are behind why the character wants this change. How did that motivation work go? Did you guys come up with some reasons that the character is changing and growing right now, why they are trying to have emotional growth, why they are trying to become better people, or to finally face those demons that they've been dealing with? You definitely need to try to have 3 of these. And if you're struggling, just drop it in the comments and we'll go back to that. Now let's talk about conflict with the internal plot. The conflict, just like with the external conflict, is the but this is all the emotional things that's keeping your character from changing. Let's go to like an example of alcoholic. So an alcoholic really wants to get sober because he's having trouble functioning in life, or it's costing him relationships, but it's hard because there's alcohol everywhere you turn. There's all of the external goal motivation conflict. He wants to get sober because his life is falling apart, but there is temptation everywhere he turns. Internally, though, what an alcoholic really wants to do is to fill that hole within themselves. That is what makes them drink or do drugs or whatever. They've got some kind of a hole inside themselves that they are trying to fill and stop. And so he really wants to be healed emotionally because he's numbing the pain in his life with the alcohol, which is costing him relationships, costing him his self-esteem, costing him peace, costing him everything else. The more he drinks, the worse it gets. And so it's constantly causing that. But, and here's the emotional things that keep him there, facing those deep emotional wounds, those traumas, facing what is in that hole inside himself that he's drinking to cover up is really tough and scary. I remember going to therapy like in the very beginning and feeling like there was this huge water balloon over my head that I couldn't even poke because it would just flood me if I dealt with all of the things that were going on in my life. And so that's a conflict that gets in the way of you having emotion or your character having emotional growth. Why does your character want to keep themselves walled off or in the same place or not deal with their emotional things? What is keeping them from doing that? And of course, I'm going to ask you to come up with it. So take a minute if you haven't already and come up with the traumas, anxieties, insecurities that are keeping them stuck in their old habits. What is keeping them from moving forward emotionally? And these are hard. I'm not going to lie and say that this is really easy and that we all come up with it like that. This internal emotional journey is really, really difficult to figure out because you've got to really know your character. And for me, at least, I get to know them as I write them. So I don't necessarily know all this here, but I do sort of know what my character's coping mechanism is. And that will help me kind of figure out what their internal goal is. For the book I'm working on right now on the Fun Fiction Fridays, her not being there for her sister is this deep emotional wound that has caused her to overly compensate the rest of her life with everybody else, but she has not been there for herself. And so I was able to pull all that from knowing what that deep emotional wound is. If you don't know your character's deep emotional wounds, then I highly recommend you go over to the Circle community and go into the resources section and download the handout on plot. How will the plot force the character to face this? They have to have something that is threatening their place in the world, their identity, their job, their security, whatever that happens to be. It has to have something like that. The external and the internal have to go together. I don't have that slide on this one, but I do have it in one of the internal videos. I think it might be the third one, where I talk about Pretty Woman and how Richard Gere, his external goal is to get through his business by having no emotional connections, just get in, get out, make that business happen. But the internal conflict of being loved for who he is goes directly in opposition to his external goal. I think maybe if you're not having enough of an external, then you're kind of doing what's an easy plot for the characters because it's easy to write a lot of times. Whereas if you have an external that is really true to who they are as people and what matters to them as people, then that will be easier, I think, and make it better But see, I start usually with external and then figure out the internal from there. I start with, a missing child, a murder or something like that. And then I figure out the internal from there. So you definitely have to come up with an external plot that works for you and for those characters, because not every character will fit into every external plot idea that you have. So it has to really work for who they are as people. Now we're going to go on to a little chart you can do if you want. You don't have to make this chart, but a lot of people do use this with external, internal, and filling it in. Either way, I want you to write both of those sentences. Character wants what, because, but. You need to do both of those. And if you take a second and do those, you may see some overlap and some places where the internal is in direct opposition to the external. Take a second and write these two sentences out for yourselves. To write both of them, the external and the internal. If you guys have trouble with that sentence, feel free to drop it into the comments and I will help you with that, because you really do need that for your whole book. Now we're going to talk about how this works with a plot. If you look at the structure of a plot, it is escalating, right? Things are getting worse. Remember that whole metaphor I gave you about the roller coaster? Things should be constantly getting worse. So you have the ordinary world. You may or may not have to have that opening scene. But either way, you have the inciting incident, which is the trouble, the catalyst that forces them to change. Their internal plot line is running very similar to the external plot line, not necessarily at the same pace, because people sometimes have growth after going through events in life. They're going to run at a tension-filled pace. If you're discovery writing, even if you know quite a lot of the external, how do you keep writing when you're unsure of the internal GMC? I think with the internal GMC, my key for finding that is to go back to the deep emotional wounds. What happened to them when they were kids or, young adults early in their adult life that has traumatized them? Everybody has had something. If it's, a really bad car accident or the death of someone in front of them or some kind of an abuse or something like that, everybody has had some kind of a trauma in their life. For a comedy book, maybe you'll do something a little bit lighter, like it's not really light, but maybe their house was foreclosed on and they lost everything. That creates a need to always feel financially secure. You can have some kind of a trauma that's not like a murder in front of them. So if you have a character who is busting her butt to make money all the time and never stops from working, she's always at work. Maybe that trauma was that they lost everything when they were kids. I watch Married at First Sight. I know it is a garbage reality show. My husband shakes his head all the time. The last season, the one that just came out, the one with Mirla and Gil, I could just see that girl the whole time. She was completely dedicated to work and to money and to status symbols because she grew up in extreme poverty. And that correlation between her internal and her external was very clear, because she never ever wanted to feel like that little girl that was ashamed of where she came from again. And part of how she does that is by buying Louis Vuitton shoes. That's really what you want to do. You really have to go back and find those deep emotional wounds. And the adventurous duo still has some kind of trauma as kids. Maybe they got into trouble together and one let down the other, and that deep emotional wound of not being there when he needed him is going to scar him and affect their relationship later. It may not come up right now because a lot of us learn to put things aside for friends or family. You really want to kind of look at what happened to them as children. It affects them so much. And by not doing that discovery work, you're going to have some trouble coming up with all of this. Remember that I said that the external goal has a lot of steps to accomplish it. If it doesn't, it's not big enough. Those steps, those micro goals become scenes. Like in Taken, where he has got to get on the plane, he's got to talk to the bad guy, he's got to find an interpreter. All of those things are steps to his goal of finding his daughter. And that means that every single scene has a goal as well. It's not just there just because. It has a goal that feeds into his overall arching goal. Liam Neeson doesn't waste any time right there. He's got to keep going after that external goal. Every time you write a scene, and this was one of the things that really turned things around for me with my second published book, because I wrote 10 books in 8 years before I sold my first one. And then I sold my first one and I had to write another one. And I was like, oh crap, I actually don't really know what I'm doing yet. And so when I realized that every one of my scenes had to have a goal that fed into the plot, it changed everything for me. And it really changed the way that I structure books and I structure scenes so that they're not just there, they're actually feeding a purpose. So you really want to look at these individual micro goals and think about how to force your character to face their fears and things that are going on with them. I do want you to think about 3 to 5 scenes that are necessary for your character to achieve the external goal, and ask yourself why this has to happen and what is the impact on the character of this happening. What will happen if they achieve it or they don't? Because not achieving it, failing, is what we're going to talk about next. Because failure is the best thing that can ever happen to your character. Cheryl said it's hard to brainstorm those scenes that feed into the plot. And that's because, in my opinion, you don't have enough of an external plot. So you don't have enough that's already happening with your character to create those other scenes. So what am I talking about with failure for a scene? It means the character either gets what they want at the end of the scene, like Liam Neeson lands in France, finds that guy that has some clues, but then he fails because the guy dies. And so he doesn't get what he needs entirely. The thing with failure is that characters have to fail. Because as we all know, anybody who's raised kids or had, a friend is constantly making the same mistakes, you got to fail over and over again in order to learn. People are slow learners and they need things to increasingly spiral out of control before they make changes in their lives. Remember how I said that people don't change without a catalyst to force them to change. And this failure keeps them going along. And this is what makes them kind of be plucky characters that we root for, because they get up off the floor after they fail and they keep going after it. Whereas in real life, maybe, if you fail, you might just kind of go back to your comfort zone. But characters should keep going because the goal is important to them. Achieving that goal is super important to them. That's what creates increasing stakes. So if your sheriff hero, Cheryl, fails in catching this guy in time, and he's already had this failure where he hanged the wrong man, that's just going to feed into that internal, I am a crappy sheriff, I am letting these people down, maybe I shouldn't be here kind of feeling, maybe I have what it takes for this. That's going to feed into it. So the failure can just feed into the things that they have going on in general already. The plot should also be triggering their internal demons. The scene and the character failing triggers the character's worst fears. Remember, we went back to all of those worst fears earlier when we were talking about this whole thing, when you come up with all of your character's worst fears. So when that character fails, it, just like an example with Cheryl's character, that creates their worst fears again. People either fight, flight, or freeze, fight, flight, freeze. When something like that happens, what you're going to want with your character is the first one. You're going to want them to fight. They may flee, they may freeze for a minute, but they'll come back and fight because they're characters that we are rooting for. So always remember that. And if you've slept through the whole thing, and this is the only thing you pay attention to, and I've had this in some of my videos before, you have to remember that people's weaknesses get them into trouble and their strengths save the day at the end. Whatever weakness your character has, maybe it's a fear of taking chances or a fear of rejection or an inability to trust other people, that should get them into trouble over and over and over again. And their strengths, their smarts, their willingness to take chances, all of that will save the day. In the character master plan that's on the website, the Writing Compelling Fiction website, you will find a list of skills and strengths for your character and a list of weaknesses. And when you come up with those, it really helps you to feed that failure a little bit more for them, because we are all self-defeating. We all do that. Like, I'm looking for a cookie right now, even though I've already gained like 3 pounds baking over the last couple of weeks. I want a cookie, dang it, even though I know it's not in my best interest. And so how does that translate into your plot? Their weaknesses create their actions. They retreat to their comfort zone. They retreat to what they know. That creates their actions. And their fears create their reactions. So a character that doesn't trust other people is going to react differently than a character who trusts everybody. So if you know who your character is, that will create their reactions. And until they learn to stand up to that fear, they will not solve the problems at hand. And then they lived happily ever after. So here's a few points to remember: that every novel needs a goal, motivation, and conflict for the major players. You don't have to do it for the minor characters unless you're going to have a book that picks up that character in the next one. It has to be important enough to carry the story from the beginning to end, and things have to continually get worse until your characters learn their lessons. And as I said, The romance is never, ever the plot. I want to dwell on this because I've talked about it a whole lot and said it to you guys over and over again. And now you have a framework. And yes, I realized that this was a whole lot to take in. The great thing about this video is you can just leave it there and you can go back to it and really take time to go through these steps. And if you're getting stuck or you're having trouble, come to the Friday writing sprints or comment to me. These are 3 books that I recommend. The one I talked about at the beginning is The Writer's Journey, and then obviously Writing Compelling Fiction, and then Donald Maass. I really love his book. And if you're not already following the channel and all of that, then you really should be, because we talk about a lot of these things on there. Malcolm, I love that you're going to use StoryGrid. I'm not as much of a planner ahead of time with my books, so I don't use a lot of those tools because a lot happens innately for me. And in order to develop that innate sense, you got to read a lot and you got to write a lot. Nothing will teach you how to write more than actually writing. If you guys get to this and you go back and you rewatch this video and you're just like, wait, I don't get this. Again, you can drop a comment on the YouTube channel, or you can go to the Circle community and ask me there. I really kind of like that when you can ask me the question in a venue where other people can learn from it rather than just emailing me or DMing me, because I really want everybody to learn, not just you. So if you can do that, that would be great. And don't worry if you don't get it all at one time. It took me years, literally years, to figure out and put all these pieces together. We will take these in little segments as well on the channel and in all of the other things that we do. Don't beat yourself up for not getting it all at once or not putting it all together at once. Sometimes the growth happens in stages, just like with your characters. Thank you all for being here. And if you have a friend that's a writer, feel free to invite them. We're in this together. We shouldn't just be little solitary creatures writing on our own. So I appreciate you all of you being here. I will have a video out next week, and I will have a Fun Fiction Friday next Friday. So see you then, and see you on the other side of the page.